Hey guys, welcome back. So now let's get into the return of Shazam, because Billy Batson has been missing for a good minute and he got some splaining to do, especially with the changes since Darkseid War and where we stand in this series in relation to Dark Knight's Metal, and all of which I want to pick apart throughout the course of this video as we get into a lot of this new information. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so for anybody who's just new to Shazam period, you see the films coming out, and because of that you want to get into the comics, well, you're in luck. Because as far as DC Rebirth and just hopping into Shazam #1 in 2018, you can even jump right in here, or the furthest you would need to go back is Volume 2 of Justice League from the New 52, which is what DC Rebirth is loosely based off of. And what I mean by that is Shazam #1 in DC Rebirth just starts off with him and the entire family, his adopted family that is, who we met in the Shazam one-shot, which did a great job of telling us the origin of Billy Batson with a bit of a more modern take. Because at this point, when he was adopted by the Vasquezes, he had been through a number of different homes, and though at first he had initially clicked with the parents, but when he went home and met the kids, it was really a mess from there. Like, Billy was just being a jerk, put little Darla in tears, because when he got there, he just didn't connect with the other kids, and he kind of figured, why try, because we're not a real family, which was a pretty messed up thing to say. But with it starting this way back with the New 52, what it did was give us a different version of Billy Batson that wasn't perfect, but when it came down to doing what was right, he was capable of overcoming his frustrations and able to do the right thing. And I strongly believe, like, even like with Jeff Johns writing this, like, it was like 2011, 2012, somewhere around there, but with doing this or making this change, it just gives him more direction for where the character can go, which is something that I believe is going to be pretty critical later on in DC Rebirth to make some of the changes with Shazam make sense. Because if you guys remember, when he first met the Wizard Mammergan, he didn't think that Billy really had it in him, or not even so much that he didn't have it in him, but he didn't believe that Billy was pure. And it struck a really good conversation between the two of them. Like, Billy was just like, dude, you haven't been out lately. Like, ain't nobody pure out there. And after examining Billy's mind, to where at first he had seen much of his rebellion from being a foster child and going from home to home, he then examined his mind again to where he saw a number of redeeming qualities in Billy, and so he made him his champion, giving him the powers of the old pantheon, to which he would also inherit Mammergan's chair on the Council of Eternity. And the urgency of all this was mainly because Dr. Sivana had just released Black Adam, who immediately after went in search of Mammergan, who had not long after died, which left Shazam pretty much to figure out things on his own. But before the wizard had passed, he had given Shazam some guidelines and some words of wisdom concerning his family, telling Billy that he should protect them and that his family is what it can be, not what it should be, which is a secret spell. And this eventually led to Shazam sharing his powers with his family, on one end protecting them, but at the same time he still really needed the help. Like, he really needed the help. But even with this happening, it all pointed back to the words of Mammergan, who also told Billy to be sure to protect his family, much like Mammergan should have with his own. But with this leading into Shazam #1 in DC Rebirth, which picks up a little under a year from the events that I just mentioned from the New 52. And what I believe that Jeff Johns is doing with that is pretty much a similar method to like what we've seen in Wonder Woman issues, to where we hop in current day in that issue, and current day for that issue will turn out to be sometime further back in relation to other series like Batman or Damaged or Superman. In that way, whichever series that you're reading, it has a lot more liberty with the pace, but every so often you'll get your references to everything else that's going on in relation to the rest of DC Rebirth, or at least that's your more common method. In the case of Shazam, I do believe that's going to be a little bit different, mainly because we get to find out early on that this is going to be more of an adventure type tale, which will pull Shazam and the family away from the main DC universe, but then eventually bring them back once all the other issues from all the other heroes have come to a common place as far as timeline. And trust me, that'll make much more sense in just a little bit. But as far as Billy and his brothers and sisters, while they're on this school trip at the museum, which is getting robbed in a very Spider-Man Homecoming type fashion, just that instead of the Avengers, it's the Justice League mask that these guys got on. But for these robbers who pretty much thought, okay, we're just gonna steal some valuable stuff from this museum, it's a little field trip going on, but hey, how hard could it be? And to their surprise, it could be hard. It could be very hard, which is exactly what it was when not only did they find out that Shazam was there, but it was also all of his brothers and sisters, who, like I mentioned before, Billy shared his powers with, so now it's like Shazam times 6. And at this time, they're only going up against some armed robbers, and for that reason, there's no back and forth, and they're able to take the robbers down rather easily. But one of the things that I wanted to focus on that occurred right when this began, when Billy first transformed before the family came to help him out, which was backup that he really didn't need because these were like just dudes with guns. But when Billy initially transformed, he mentioned that he had been having trouble saying his name lately. And this is really one of the first foreshadowings that we get in this narrative, that throughout the course of however many issues, we'll begin to get the explanation for a number of things. And if you're like me and you want your dessert first, you probably just want Jeff Johns to just jump to everything with Darkseid War and just go from there, like immediately just pick up from there. But instead what it does is it goes back and begins exactly 1 year after Billy was adopted by the Vasquez family, which is a little less than a year from the time that he shared his powers with his siblings like I mentioned earlier. But one with Jeff Johns taking this route, which is the long way around, but it's cool. But when it comes to things like us seeing Shazam having trouble saying his name, and after their time at the museum, everyone goes home and they're having their 1 year celebration for Billy becoming a part of the family, these are a couple things that show us that Jeff Johns has taken the time to better establish and expand on the mythology of Shazam rather than just hopping into his new series and just changing it. And this is something that I feel like is very necessary, because when the kids finish dinner and they make this excuse that, oh, we gotta go do homework because bump dessert, I'm about this homework, it's really something they just say so they can just leave the dinner table and go make their way over to the Rock of Eternity, to where at this point they're just setting up and beginning to make this like their base of operations. And if you guys remember, like in relation to Dark Knight's Metal, like when we went to the Rock of Eternity, within the Metal series, this place was deserted. Shazam and the Shazam family were nowhere to be found, and throughout the course of Metal, with the battle between Black Adam and Wonder Woman, this place got wrecked pretty bad. But back at this time when Billy and the others were setting up shop, Eugene had been pretty much mapping out the place, and at a time where they had an idea of the layout and where everything was at, a wall just goes missing, and he rushes to go get everybody to go check it out. And even though at this moment we don't know what caused this wall to go missing, we do eventually see that this leads to a portion of the Rock of Eternity that is called the Station. And this is pretty important as far as where the Shazam series is going, because within this station you have 7 different subway tunnels which each lead to a different location, and each one of these locations correspond with the 7 thrones at the Rock of Eternity. But what this is going to do throughout the series is going to take us through to these 7 locations, which is really interesting because there's only 6 members of the Shazam family, counting Shazam. And these locations, of course, they correspond with the different gods and the different thrones who sat at the Rock of Eternity prior to the point to where it came down to just being Mammergan. But with us getting these 7 locations, it sets us up for a journey throughout the Magic Lands that's going to give us a more in-depth teaching about the history of those who came before, and much of the information that Mammergan would have taught Billy had he not died just before passing his seat. And for the readers, this is something that we really do need to know. And I truly believe that it's important that all of this is explained and established before we really jump into what happened after Darkseid War once his powers have changed, because if this series really just jumped into that point and just moved from there forward, we would have only had the understanding of his power set switching from the old pantheon with the old gods and that switching to the new gods. And quite a bit of that I've already explained on my playlist as far as Darkseid and his death and transformations, and that playlist is down in the description. But the reason why I truly believe that it's important that we go back and get a better understanding is because now so much more has changed. Because for Shazam, his power is not only grounded or originally grounded from the powers of Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury, but it's also anchored in magic, which at this point in time has gone through a lot, and it's not quite what it used to be. And although you could have Shazam appear after these recent reveals and after things have concluded with a whole new power set, just hit the ground running and explain a bit of this through flashbacks, but instead I like that Jeff Johns has taken us through this journey that has been well planned and well sought out, because the flashback method could almost make it seem like the writer's fixing something after writing themselves like into a corner or something. But when they discovered this, and it's kind of at the point where they barely know what they're working with, Freddy, who's the one who always has like your solutions even though it's not necessarily the right solution, and in an attempt to turn on the lights, he just pulls this lever that says on and is like, off we go. But aside from this jumping off over at the Rock of Eternity, back home Mr. and Mrs. Vasquez get a knock on the door, and it's Billy Batson's father, who is supposed to be dead, and I'm pretty curious to see what he has to say and what's his explanation. But I do also like that when we see him, he also looks a lot like Shazam, which makes sense because Mammergan told Billy back in the New 52 that when he turns into Shazam, that Billy hasn't gotten older, but he's just the physical representation of his full potential. So it makes sense. But I do gotta say, like, when Billy first became Shazam, because he didn't really have the teaching or the mentorship to really figure out what really came along with that, and the only learning curve that he really had was his time fighting Black Adam and joining the Justice League. Because of that, he really needs to learn what's going on here first, at least to some extent, before we just go and jump into everything that's gonna change later on. And I do believe that at some point, like much like what we got with Darkseid throughout the Wonder Woman issues, where we saw his transformation take place, I do believe that much later on, once the foundations are set and we learn a bit more about the history before Shazam and what truly all comes along with being the champion of magic, then after that, when Shazam transitions from the powers of the old pantheon to the power of the new gods, then we'll get a similar telling, sort of like what we got with Darkseid, but it'll take place within Shazam's new solo series. And it may cross over with others later on, like Justice League Odyssey, but from the way that this series is starting out, I do believe that's going to be way down the line. Or at least until after the Shazam family has explored the Magic Lands. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Jeff Johns has a lot to unpack within this series, and even though, once again, I want my dessert first, but I also understand that with doing it this way and unpacking these things and getting them out the way, that it cleans up the storytelling for later on, which will prevent a lot of things from just getting real messy once Shazam catches up. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.